13,600. But if you both choose the steel wall, you leave today's game with what you came with, nothing. It's the ultimate test of faith, trust, and let's face it, greed. Take a moment to look at the balls in front of you so you know for definite which is split and which is steel, but obviously keep them concealed from each other. Just have a look. Okay. It's the easiest choice, but the most difficult one. What I want you to do is to spend half a minute talking to each other about what you both should do. Nick? Abraham?
Abraham, I want you to trust me. 100% I'm going to hit the steel ball.
Sorry,
I'm going to choose the steel ball. I want you to do split, and I promise you that I will split the money with you.
Well, after you take the steel.
Yeah.
You're going to take steel.
Yeah.
I'm going to take split.
Yeah.
So you take the money.
And I'll split it with you.
After the show.
Yeah. Abraham, I promise you I'll do that. If you do steal, we both walk away with nothing. I'm telling you 100% I'm going to do it.
I appreciate that. But I'll give you another alternative. Why don't we just both pick?
I'm not going to pick today. I'm going to steal. Abraham, honestly, 100% going to steal.
So you're not just steal?
No, I'm honest, and I'm going to tell you.
You're an honest
I am. That's why I'm telling you to steal. If you do split, then I will split the
I
money.
can't see myself picking that.
Okay, well I'm going to steal, so I'm going to leave with nothing.
Where's your brains coming from? I can't work out.
I know that I'm a decent guy, and I will split the money with you.
Well, we should just both split then.
No, I'm going to do steal.
There is no
No,
legal
I'm not serious. I'm not serious.
okay to give you the
Of course. If I gave you my word, now let me tell you what my word means.
Okay.
My father once said to me, a man who doesn't keep his word is not a man. He's not worth nothing. Not worth a dollar.
I agree.
So,
Abraham, I'm going to steal. So you've got a choice. You either steal, and we both walk away with nothing, because you know I told you my intention, and I told you that I would split the money with you, Abraham.
if I gave you my word that I was going to split, I will split. And you're going to take steel. So,
The only way you can guarantee to walk away with 6,800 is to guarantee that you both put the split ball in. And I do now have to push you for a decision. It's a tough one.
you've lost it because I said it.
Lost it.
You're walking away with no money because you're an idiot.
No, that's not
You're an idiot. That's what you're an idiot.
This can go on all right. These people are going to get up for breakfast. Nick, choose split or steal. Abraham, choose split or steal. Now, please. Choose a ball.
Right, I'll tell you what I'm going to go with.
Lovely.
I'm going to go back.
It's yours.
You cannot change your balls now. Split or steal? Yes! Congratulations, you have both split and each received £6,800. It's charity all the way. A market trader you can really trust. Congratulations to you both. I've been Jasper Carrot. This has been a remarkable game. They've been lovely. This has been Golden Balls. Until next time. Goodbye.
Now, I'm blank. I feel blank. That was the hardest money I've ever had to work for.
I feel great. You obviously haven't let the charity sector try and get money. I'm going to buy an oven, and I think me and my friend are going to Australia.
You're giving money that way. I think I'll whisper money off.
Okay, so it's kind of a fun way to introduce strategic behavior. So when we look at oligopoly, we've got a few firms.
Kansas homeowners, if you're an Evergy customer,
All right. Rid of that. So when we have a couple companies, the key thing is that their profits and actions are interdependent with each other. So we talk about the interdependence of firms. What one company chooses has an impact on the other company's profits. And so we can look at this interdependence through game theory, and it applies to all kinds of agents. So we can look at consumers and governments. We could look at Russia and the Ukraine, should the Russia invade. We could look at the U.S. intervening or not in the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. If we say that we're going to give weapons or sanctions against Russia, If we say that, are we bluffing or not, right? So that type of interaction between can be modeled like this. So with this particular game, which one was the guy who was off to the right on the screen? Is it person A or person B? Which one was the guy who was making the offer off to the right? So here, each person had to choose whether to split or steal without knowing what the other person was choosing, right? And the other person was choosing split or steal. And if they both split, they both won, but they shared the pot, right? They shared the pot. And if this person split and this person stole, then this person got the whole pot and this person got nothing. So I just put win-lose here just because normally we put the numbers in there. And then if they both steal, they both get nothing. And then vice versa here, if this person splits and this person steals. So my question is, the guy off to the right, he was kind of playing a certain strategy. The way I've got this set up, was he person A or B? Was he Al or Ben? What was his strategy? What was he doing? What did he say he was going to do for sure? Steal, right? And so what was he asking the other guy to do? Split. And then he on the back end, that would give us this solution value where he wins the pot, but he said on the back side, I'll cut you in half anyway. So why did he do that? Ultimately, we saw the end, what happened in the end. Why did he take such a strong tactic and strategy of trying to convince him that I'm for sure going to steal? I don't care what your papa taught you about if you're a real man, you keep your word. I am going to keep my word. I'm going to steal. And then we learned that he actually lied, which is kind of funny at the end, right? Why did he do that?
Make sure it was split so he didn't get stolen.
Yeah, so he was trying to convince him for sure to split so that he knew he would split and they'd end up at this solution value anyway, and they didn't have to do it on the back end. So there's other tactics that you could use to try to get this scenario. Or there's another video that I won't have time to do. Maybe I'll play it at some point. That's kind of fun, or maybe I'll send it out on email, where you could try to get somebody convinced that you're going to split. I'm for sure going to split. I'm going to for sure split. Oh yeah, you're my friend. We're going to for sure split. We have families at home and diapers to feed, and right. So you kind of talk cheap talk possibly on the front end, and then when they do it, one person splits and this person steals and gets the whole pot. That's happened on that show too. So it's kind of fun to look at that interaction when you only have a couple companies. So remember, perfect competition has how many sellers in a competitive environment? Monopolistic competition or perfect competition? How many sellers? Number of sellers, one of your characteristics of a competitive market. I'll give you a hint. Thousands, right? So everybody's a drop of water in the bucket. And so this type of thing doesn't go on, right? When there's lots of competitors, you can't make deals with thousands of people. You can't do what we just saw on the screen and make lots of deals and maybe bluffing or whatever, like you're playing poker or something. It can't be done in a competitive environment. So we like to have competitive environments. However, there's some environments where we see the market gravitating to just having a few firms or possibly one firm, as we're learning in this chapter with monopoly and oligopoly. Okay, so any questions or comments there? We'll kind of come back to that a little bit later today with what's called game theory. But before we go, I wanted to look at monopoly a little bit more. So let's kind of review what we did yesterday to kind of sum up monopoly. It was kind of the last thing we did. So long run conclusions for monopoly. So draw a downward sloping demand curve. You're basically just replicating what we did at the end of your notes yesterday. The marginal revenue curve is downward sloping and twice the slope of the demand curve. So one way to kind of cheat and get that picture to look nice is to do that. It starts up here. So we get the marginal revenue curve. looking something like that. Even monopolists cannot escape the law of diminishing marginal product, so there's an upward sloping J-shaped marginal cost curve. There's an average total cost somewhere in here. We know that, we learned yesterday that we'd expect a monopolist to be earning some profit. So we're going to draw the average total cost curve down here. Remember that the marginal cost curve always intersects through the minimum point of the average total cost curve. All firms maximize profit by the Holy Grail. Produce the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit is equal to the cost of the last unit. So that monopoly is going to produce that many units. It's going to charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay for the product. So you go up to the demand curve that holds information about consumers' preferences on how much they're willing to pay for different quantities. So at the profit maximizing quantity, we'd head over and the price that the monopolist is going to charge would be that amount. We did some real numbers yesterday, so I think I'm going to leave these generic. The average total cost of producing this quantity, we go up to the average total cost curve, hang a left, and the average total cost is that number in dollars. And so the profits is the difference between price and average total cost times the quantity. So this rectangle region ended up being economic profits greater than 0. So this is about where we left off last time. The profit signal's on, which is signaling still what? What word with the profit signal? Enter, enter, enter. But when companies come to try to enter this industry and compete with this company, what do they hit? So the signal's on, the competitors start to come, but what do they hit when they try to enter the market? Barriers to entry, or entry barriers. Good. So entry barriers were things like possibly government-generated patents, or the government granted the right for the electric company to provide electricity to us in Ottawa, right? So it's a lot of times a government-granted monopoly for various reasons, some of which could be political, by the way. Maybe it's just because we live in a country where I can divvy out the electric service to my golfing buddy, right? I run the country, I'm a dictator, and I can call the shots, and so I play favorites. I don't use the market system to do an open bid where everybody's treated equally, and the lowest bidder that is going to provide electrical service to my community wins the bid, right? That would be using a market-based principle to try to get electricity to my community. Instead, other mechanisms like playing favorites or whoever can bribe me the most, right? You can serve electricity to my community as long as you pay me $1 million, right? So that happens in other systems. That would be more of a political process rather than a market process allocating scarce resources to the highest and best use. And so in the United States here, for the most part anyway, we believe in a market system, although that tends to erode over time is what we're seeing, unfortunately. So when you hear of democratic socialism or something, that's certainly a move the other direction of bigger government rather than more limited government. So be aware of what some of those words mean. Taking your first principles class, it's important to think about that. Do we trust the people in government enough that they're going to make better decisions than thousands of self-interested, profit-seeking individuals who compete with each other? Is the government going to do better than the lots of drops of water? My opinion, the answer is generally no. We don't want concentrated power in any particular place, and one of those places is government. Why would you put concentrated power in the hands of a few in Washington, D.C., right? So the same thing holds true when we bring the government into the picture. Is the government there to support and harness a competitive environment? Or is the government there to try to make decisions on what would make your life better and your life better and your life better according to what they think is the right thing to do? Right? So that's kind of some of our differences. So now what do we get out of this? So remember that the marginal cost curve turned out to be the supply curve from last chapter and the chapter before with the cost curve. So when we think about marginal cost, remember as marginal revenue changed in a competitive environment, then this really determines what quantity will be supplied. So the marginal cost curve is really thought of as the supply curve in a competitive environment. And so in a competitive environment, what quantity do we get? Where supply equals demand. And so that gives us kind of an anchoring point of what's going on with the monopoly. So where in a competitive environment, if this is the marginal cost of doing business and this is the demand, which is also the marginal benefit, more generically, we talked about marginal utility in previous chapters. We're starting to kind of get our feet under us and kind of build some of these things as we move into these final chapters. So this spot here is what we would think of would happen in a competitive environment. And so this is the allocatively efficient quantity. So we talked about efficiency before, and that is where supply and demand intersected, where marginal benefit and marginal cost intersected for society. But the monopoly is producing this quantity. So this kind of gives us a little picture of what the idea of monopoly is. When you control the market, you can potentially hold back some of the supply and jack up the prices, right? Hold back the supply, jack up the prices is what this model kind of helps us highlight. Okay, so let me write some of those pieces as far as this being our long-run conclusions for monopoly. So long-run conclusions for monopoly. Number one, we expect economic profits greater than zero in the long run. And so a great final exam question would be something along the lines of, why do economic profits persist in the long run with monopoly? Now we've already talked about the answers. Anybody got it right off the top of their head? What would allow them to keep having profits in the long run? Controlling the supply is one of it. What else?
Profit.
You guys said it already. Apparently my pantomime in here, what is it? Pantomime? Yeah. Whatever, when the guys don't talk and they do it. What is it? What is the characteristic of monopoly that keeps the profits alive and well? Boundaries, but barriers, right? So remember, the key thing with competition is that other drops of water are going to enter the market. When other companies enter the market, what happens to price? It drops. That was our lesson from the competitive market, right? So competition is going to drop price. It's going to drop price all the way to where it equals the average total cost, where there's zero economic profit. The firms are only earning a normal profit. So real important conclusion that we get here is that these barriers to entry are causing problems with abnormally high profits. And so the solution to that would be, let's try to make the market more competitive, right? We don't need the government to necessarily come in and force the price to be less. We're going to talk about that solution and some of the problems we might have with it. We don't need the government to say, oh, you just have to, I'm the government, I'll come in and fix prices. But rather the government could be there to say, what are the barriers? How could I drop some of the barriers to entry, right? That would be a good government solution to say, let's try to enhance competition, and then this problem's going to naturally correct itself without adversely affecting maybe the product. Because as the government chooses this price, what happens if costs go down? Now all of a sudden there's more profits even at the other price, right? If innovation and technology cause this to drop, then there'd be more profits. And so the competitive answer is a lot better one. All right, so in the long run, we'd expect economic profits greater than 0. Why? This is due to barriers to entry. So maybe government can reduce the barriers. We talked about cocaine yesterday. So even in drug markets, how could we possibly reduce some of the barriers? Well, better policing in a particular area and better courts or something. Maybe there's something to be fixed there, so that cocaine prices could come down to something reasonable. Right? Okay, I'm kind of throwing the joke, and glad I got a couple smiles out of you. So yeah, maybe there's other ways we can, use the government to reduce barriers. All right, so that's one of our big conclusions. Reduce barriers, and let's just put increase competition. That's our key ingredient for solutions. Number 2, the quantity the monopolist is making is less than what is allocatively efficient. So this is my shorthand notation that just says they're producing less than what's efficient. So allocative efficiency means that marginal cost equals marginal benefit, or supply equals demand. Just to kind of get that quantity where the QAE is. So we have an inefficiency. There's opportunities to make society a better place if we could get rid of this barriers to entry and move more towards a competitive solution. Okay, and then number 3 is that the firm is not productively efficient. So Q, the quantity that the monopolist is making is not productively efficient. So productive efficiency was operating at the minimum of the average total cost curve. So PE, productive efficiency, PE means we produce at the minimum of our average total cost curve. That did happen in competition, in perfect competition, but it's not happening here. So our minimum point again is this point. So if we draw a line down here, this is the productively efficient point. So we're missing the mark on efficiency. It's not good to have one company controlling the market. So some of these inefficiencies are true when we have a few firms, and that's what we'll explore here in a little bit. Does anybody have any questions? That kind of wraps up the regular monopoly model. Okay, so kind of a special case where the argument is we could have some government intervention to take advantage of things. It's called a natural monopoly. So a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly exists when economies of scale are relevant over all production ranges. We'll kind of unpack that in a little bit. So economies of scale was the idea that you can decrease your long run average cost by just making more, right? Making higher volume is good. So in short, economies of scale means increased quantity leads to a decrease in long run average total cost. Long run average total cost. So let's think about electricity or something. We talked about how expensive it would be to allow multiple companies with multiple lines or something going to each house. Doesn't sound too reasonable. And so let's just imagine a good where we have a long run average cost curve. Let me try this a little bit differently. So this is the average total cost, and we have 4 companies producing the good. So we got 4 companies producing the good. So each of the 4 has an average total cost of $40. So little q is 100, and the total market quantity is 400. So if there's economies of scale, that means if we doubled the output to 200, then the cost would be less, right? So at 200, let's say we've got another average total cost curve that is operating here. So let's go, this is with the average total cost at 100, let's just call it a 1 and a 2. So let's pretend that this is the environment that you're operating in, and currently there's 4 firms. There's 4 companies, and each company is producing 100 units. So example, suppose the industry currently has 4 firms producing 100 units each with average total cost per unit of $40. So that's our starting place. So this shows that there would be some economies of scale if one company could produce 200 units. So currently there's 4 companies each producing 100 units. What might happen in that industry? What would be incentive for companies to do if this was their cost structure? Here's the short run situation. Each of them are producing 100 units. What might 2 companies be thinking? Merging, right? So 2 companies merge together, and then what would the industry be left with? Well, we'd have 1 company making 200 and 2 other companies still producing 100. Now, when that company produces 200, they're able to do it at a cost of $32. It's still a competitive environment, but who can outprice who? The big company can do it cheaper or more expensively? Cheaper, right? So their pricing could be less than these guys, and so maybe they price their product at $39, right? These guys are screwed at $39 because the customers aren't going to pay $40 when they can get it for $39. So what are the other 2 remaining companies at 100 forced to do? Merge. And so now we have 2 companies producing 200. Now lastly, if there exists another average total cost curve over here, and this isn't going to be drawn to scale exactly, what are these last two companies thinking would be a good idea? What are these last, so now we remember our story is going here, we've got two companies each producing 200. What's these last remaining companies thinking might be a good idea? Merge. And so now we have one company producing 400 units at an average total cost of $25. And so this picture is what we did back in the cost curve chapter. The long run average total cost curve is downward sloping, showing that there's economies of scale over the relevant ranges of production. And so what would the invisible hand of free profit maximizing companies want to do, short of it being illegal? They would want to merge. And so this is what we see with companies doing today, right? Our cell phone companies just took another plunge here with the latest merger of Sprint and T-Mobile, right? So we had 4, and now we're down to 3. And so will we ever get to one company providing all of it? Is it all going to be Verizon eventually or something?
That's what I was going to say. Doesn't that just lead to a monopoly?
Yeah, and it is. And so that's why we call this a natural monopoly, to kind of bring this around, and then I'm going to show something a little bit different here. So why do we call it a natural monopoly? So let's put on here the key point. You guys can write it down below if you need to. A natural monopoly is that it is natural for companies to minimize costs by continuing to merge until there is a monopoly. So from our picture here, that would be getting down to ATC 3 in our graph. Now, with 2 companies, is that enough to keep prices efficient in terms of being close to their average total cost? If there is just 2 companies, is it possible that we'd still have a normal profit? That the companies would have to be fair, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? We talked about competitive juices flowing and prices being kept in check and companies in that industry earning a normal profit. If there's just 2 companies, is that possible to happen? Yeah, it is, right? So here, this is something called contestable markets in some cases, where these guys can't jack up the price too much. One, it's illegal in the United States with our antitrust laws for them to work together, include as one, which is where we're going to go next and kind of showing that. But that turns out to be illegal. So if the 2 companies are still competing with each other, then we might still get a pretty decent situation. So it's possible to have competitive solutions even when there's 2 companies potentially, when there's decent rules in place as far as not being able to work together on things. But once we get down to 1, well, that's gone. The competition mechanism is gone, right? So my point with all that is that it is possible in some markets that we don't have to have thousands of producers. It is possible to have structures where a couple companies, maybe 3 companies, Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T, maybe we are getting decent rates, right? We're not getting abused by the cell phone companies because that's a pretty competitive environment, right? You know, one company does the $40 per line special, and then the other one does $39.99, right? And so the pricing tends to be similar. They offer a little bit different menu. Verizon historically has been known to have the best networks and the most coverage. T-Mobile, what do? They start arguing, well, we've got 5G, and look at our map of the United States. We've got lots of coverage too, right? And so even with a couple companies, it's possible to still have some competition. All right, but what we're talking about here is a natural monopoly where maybe it is best for there to be just one company. All right, so now let's look at the implications of natural monopoly with government intervention. So implications of natural monopoly, monopoly with government intervention. All right, so we're going to draw a nice big picture. Now we might be talking about electricity or something. And we're going to have a long run average total cost curve that's just looking like the orange line here. So it's downward sloping, so we have those economies of scale. And then we've got a marginal cost curve that would lie below it and would start to approach it just the same way we did before, but the minimum point we never really get to, so long run marginal cost curve would look something like that. So line below it, but then it's getting a little closer as we go down. And now we can overlay our demand curves. So let's do a demand curve that looks something like this. With that demand curve, we have the marginal revenue curve that's twice as steep. Looks something like that. Okay. If this market is left alone and the monopoly is able to price it as they wish, then what's going to happen is they're going to do what every company should be doing. They maximize profits by producing the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit is just equal to the cost of the last unit. Then they're going to charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay, which is right here. And then they're going to be earning some economic profit. So this is the long run average cost. So average total cost is here. And they'd be getting this little green box worth of profit. Okay, so now the government steps in. So this is basically what we did before with the picture. That's what without any government intervention, that's what it would look like. And so what would be a possibility for the government to step into this? What would be a possibility for government to step in? Where's the allocatively efficient point? Look at your thing I just did on the previous picture. What was allocative efficiency? What two lines were crossing for allocative efficiency? That was the AE. Did you find it? Kennedy, you look like you're on it. What'd you get? Oh, I thought you said it looked like you were on it. We just went over it. Allocative efficiency was bullet item number 2. Yeah, Mason?
Is it the marginal cost and marginal revenue?
Good. Marginal cost and marginal revenue. Now, not marginal revenue actually, marginal benefit, which is the demand curve, right? Now, I hope I put that in my note in the notes right. Like, oh, you're making me want to check. Did you just read it wrong, or did you? Okay, so where this guy is the marginal cost and the demand curve was a right there. You do have it, but you got such a tiny graph. So make sure you got, I try to warn you guys to make a big graph when I know it's going to be one, but so this one's a good one to do a little bit bigger. So where the demand curve is the marginal benefit curve, which is what I put on your previous thing, where marginal benefit and marginal cost intersect is the allocatively efficient quantity. Okay, so back to what the government could do. If the government gets involved, ideally, what do we want to have happen in this market to prices? Is price too high or too low?
Too high.
Too high. So price needs to come down, and is quantity too low or too high?
Too low.
Too low. So we want to see quantity come this way, and ideally price come down, right? So the government could step in and try to intervene that way. Could the government come in and say, all right, electric company, you need to produce this. Produce this quantity. This is the allocatively efficient quantity. You need to produce this. They could, but what's the problem with this? No profit. Good. Very good. So here, at this quantity, the average cost is higher than the price that people are willing to pay. So you'd be having a loss. Can the government force a company to incur a loss? In the United States, can the government force a company for the long term to incur a loss? I always love posing this question. Justice, what did you say right away? No. But I see some people shaking, yeah. Doesn't the government force people to lose money? Taxes and all that fun stuff. Well, God bless America. At this point, the government cannot force you to keep operating at a loss. You have the right to go out of business, right? So this solution doesn't work. It's not profitable in the long run or the short run, by the way. And so if the government comes in to do this, then the electric company, the owner's electric company can say this. Because this is the America, right? This isn't communist China. We can do this in America. Screw you, government. You can't force me to do this, right? Now, you can't do that in China, but you can do that in the United States. And so then, if the government really wants to do this quantity, they could take it over. Now we're going down the socialist path, right? So the government could take over the electric company. Is it possible for the government to run at a loss? Yes, they do it all the time, guys. They do it all the time. In macro, most of you are going to be in macro class. We're going to talk about the government not collecting enough tax revenue to pay for their spending. They do it all the time. So they're great at that, actually, it turns out. So they're not so good at running companies, but and the reason is because they can be sloppy, right? They can be sloppy and run at losses, and there's a lack of accountability because the profit mechanism has been stripped out of it, right? And maybe there's some sort of social cause. Well, everybody has the right to electricity, and so it's a free good, right? Whatever. The point is here that it is possible for the government to operate at a loss. Why? Because they can put a gun to your head and say, pay your taxes. And when I say a gun, of course, I'm not releasing meaning a gun because we don't do that for the most part of the United States. But can you do jail time for not paying your taxes? Absolutely. That's, to me, is kind of the gun to your head thing, right? So it's no longer in this environment of the market system. What happens in the market system? A voluntary seller says, hey, items for sale, and a voluntary buyer says, I like those items. This guy don't have to buy them. This guy don't have to sell them. Why do they do it? Because each person wins. Each person gains with voluntary trade. That doesn't happen when the government steps into it. The government can force action through the law of the land. Okay. So this solution turns out to not be the direction we usually head in the United States. It's usually not straight government provision of the good. There's usually a private company or a quasi-private company, sometimes we call it. And so another possibility that is sometimes called the second best solution would be average cost pricing. So if we think, oh, well, I want you to be able to provide electricity to people. We're the government. We don't want to run the company. We know that we're not good at that. I wish they would say that sometimes, but they don't always say that. But we're going to let you guys figure it out, but you can only earn a normal profit. You can only earn a normal profit. Where on this picture would be the quantity that would be produced where the company's only earning a normal profit? It's where two lines cross up here. What is it the crossing of? Augie?
Where the average total cost meets the demand.
Yeah, good, right here. So at this quantity, let me do this one in orange. At this quantity, we have what's called average cost pricing. So I'm going to put R for government regulation here. So at this quantity, we have average cost pricing. Price equals average total cost, which means the company is earning a normal profit. So how does this thing work? Well, the government's going to have to kind of continuously be there to monitor and see that they're not charging too high a price or not, right? They're going to be kind of some auditing going on by the government. So this is called the average cost pricing rule. And it's been employed in many states for a number of years, but it's got its bugaboos too. So, so let's put options for government intervention. Number one, marginal cost pricing don't work because economic profits are less than zero, which implies government would have to own and operate at a loss. Let's just put bad solution. Bad solution, kind of a socialist concept. So again, with capitalism, we're looking for more of private ownership rather than government ownership. Okay, so number two then is the one that gets used quite a bit. It's called average cost pricing. Average cost pricing. And it essentially says that the company can only earn a normal profit. Price equals average total cost. By producing Q reg is the way I've got it on my picture, Q reg. All right, so what are some possible problems with that? It sounds kind of good on paper. It's like, oh, well, that seems like a good compromise that will be at Q reg. But tell me about the incentives of the company now. They've changed a little bit. Remember, we have a profit maximizing company at heart, profit maximizing company, and they're allowed to be the only show in town, the monopolist, but they need to be following this average cost pricing rule. What are some problems that could arise with that? And one way to think about this is, what does a normal company do? one of our drops of water in the bucket, what do they do that's different? What are they doing day by day as they try to maximize profits? How do they go about maximizing profits? What are some things that they do in terms of the operations of their business?
Cut costs.
What's that?
Cut costs.
Cut costs, right. So they're always looking to, how can we save money? Oh, I found a new thing. If we import this from India, we can save 20% on this item. Does that happen here? No. So the incentives have changed because the government's going to allow them to earn this normal profit. So if the company comes up with a cost-saving innovation of saving 20% by importing from India, what happens to the price? It goes down too. And it's like, well, that was dumb. I wasted all that time. I could have been just playing Wordle or on Facebook instead of trying to look for cost-saving measures for my company, right? And then also likewise, the other side of the equation, so cutting costs is one thing, but what do companies do in the real world that are trying to maximize profits on the revenue side? What do they try to do year after year after year? You know, the companies that are providing things like this and other products. Make them better. Make it more valuable, right? So they might have a higher quality, they have to raise price, but they know that it's a profitable move. And so does this electric company have incentive to try to innovate and make their product even better and better? No. So it's been taken away. So the profit carrot, the carrot of profits can help get things better and evolve over time dynamically into something that's more desirable. Jay?
So what about like Black Friday? So what is the deal on that? Because why are like prices, I guess, lower on Black Friday than they normally are?
So yeah, Black Friday's kind of turned into a bit of a holiday. So they're just trying to support business heading into the holiday season. And so sometimes they do some tactics like what's called a loss leader, where we have an item that's super low so that you come to my store and you buy 5 other things while you bought the cheap thing, right? So in terms of maximizing profits, I might have taken a break, maybe I broke even or even a slight loss on some product that was really cheap, but you bought 5 other things that were marked up normally, and so I still maximize profits on your purchases in general.
So with that, like everything going online kind of now,
Yeah?
is it making like everything more profitable because you don't even have to have like...
That's a great question. So are the companies basically getting rich off of us by going online, right? Because costs are less. Let me float that out to you guys. We've kind of talked about that a little bit. So basically, costs, this is kind of a bad picture to use. Maybe this one's better. But because of moving online, I don't have to have as many people staffed in the store, right? Or I have computers, and so my average cost falls. And so are they making lots of money off of that? What would cause them to not make obnoxiously lots of money? I'll give you a hint. Competition. Other people doing the same thing. So if there's healthy competition, so there might be short-term profits to, let's say the first companies that offered online ordering or something, right? They were kind of ahead of the game. And so they're like, oh wow, this turned out to be profitable. Did they take a risk? Yeah, they took a risk. They didn't know for sure that the internet was going to be the next whiz-bang thing of how people were going to buy. And they probably had to spend some money to do so. But it turned out to pay off, right? And so now they're making profit. What do their competitors do? Oh, we have online ordering now too, right? It was fairly easy to copy or to implement some of those changes. And so that's the dynamic part of the market as we move through time. By having healthy competition, we've got costs that are lower, which is good for that company who innovated in the first place. So they got some short-term gain, right? They got some short-term profits. But eventually those profits disappear through competition and prices fall. So who's the big winner in the long run? Consumers, you guys. So the prices we buy on Amazon and all this stuff online, those benefits have accrued to you with the purchases. Sometimes in a minimal way. Remember when we talked about concentrated cost and dispersed benefits? So to you, the item might be, instead of $8.99, $8.53 or something, right? But maybe if there wouldn't have been competition, that price would have went up, but now at least it stayed stable or gone down a little bit. But to you, 35 cents is not too big of a deal, but to 50 million people times 35 cents is a lot of money for society, right? For consumers in general. And so every little bit helps as the competitive process kicks in. Okay, good. Any other questions or comments? All right, so let's see. So that's our natural monopoly. We need to put some of the possibilities here. We don't want to say government to the rescue too quickly. It might be a decent solution if this happens to where we're higher than where we were without any intervention. So that's kind of a plus. So let's put key point here. That the incentive structure has changed. Incentives for the firm have changed such that they don't need to minimize cost or innovate its product. Basically, they're just kind of locked in for the long haul of providing electricity, and there's not a lot of reasons to make changes. Now, while these guys sit on their hands because of government intervention, there might be a profitable opportunity. If these guys slack off for 20, 30 years, and prices tend to not do so hot and go up because of a lack of innovation and cost minimization, eventually electricity might be high enough that somebody starts thinking, maybe solar would work. Maybe we could use the sun. Maybe we could capture electricity for each person individually and drive it into their household without having to have the power plant bring it to them, right? So all of a sudden things start bubbling up, even with this inefficiency going on, such that innovation to find other substitutes arise. Maybe we can learn how to burn other types of fuels that bring us over the, now I'm stretching a little bit, over the phone lines. So the phone lines were there, you need to use the power lines, but some sort of innovation allows us to bring it over our coax cable. We can power our whole house over coax or the Cat 5 type cable for your telephone, the old school, right? Maybe innovation would come to allow us to do that. They could trickle in energy into a box that's only this big. It's kind of a magic box. And so it slowly is always trickling, right? Because the line's only this big, but the other innovation has come in. Look at, I'm inventing something as we speak. This sounds plausible already. And so this little energy box captures all that trickling energy and builds it up like a big battery. And that's enough power to power your whole house. And then you just say, bye-bye, electric company. I can put electricity, I can get resources to my house cheaper than what you could do for me, because you've been sitting on your hands the whole time over here. All right, so it's amazing the things that can pop up all on their own by allowing a market process to take place. If the government controls it all, could they pass a law that says, sorry, no boxes allowed. You can't compete with our electricity. We need the money to keep coming on. Otherwise, we're going to have to raise taxes for everybody. Is it possible for a government to do that? Yeah, it is. They do that. They protect themselves. So a lot of stuff with COVID has been coming on with, our government agencies to some degree self-preserving, trying to protect themselves in the face of the crisis and maybe being questioned on some of the science or the research or the empirical data. Absolutely. And that's what we'd expect in economics. That's what we'd expect them to do, is to try to protect themselves. They're not angels. They're self-interested individuals that are working that happen to be working for the government. What part of their interest is keeping their job. And so job security tends to lead you to maybe put up some barriers, right, to competition. It's a natural human thing to do. Okay. Any other questions or comments there? That was good. Let's see, are we ready for game theory now? I think we are. Oh, yeah, before we do game theory, wow, this will be a good lead into it. So let's talk about oligopoly and think about firms colluding with each other, which means working together. So collusion is illegal in the United States, but not around the world. And so one of the things we have to deal with is that we might have American companies coming up with great products because of the incentive systems we have, and then we have copycats that can use it globally. All right, so let's think about a cartel. A cartel is a group of firms working together to act like a monopoly. So, in general, what they're doing is collusion. So collusion is working together and is illegal in the United States through our antitrust laws. It's illegal in some other countries too, but the United States kind of led the charge in this area as we went. So you've heard maybe about a drug cartel, right? Well, so the drug cartel would be one form of it where they're maybe dealing in an illegal activity. Here, just in general, cartel could be a group of firms working legally together. All right, so now I want to put 3 graphs side by side. One of the most famous cartels is OPEC. Have you guys heard of OPEC? What does OPEC deal with? I mean, should have had that in some class. It gets brought up in the media all the time. Has to deal with oil. So we have countries around the world that work together to restrict the world supply of oil, to act like a monopoly. So OPEC is one of the more famous cartels. And so now we're going to kind of look at what they do here. So we've got, let's say, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. There's actually about 10 countries, but Saudi Arabia. And then we have basically the world market for oil. Okay, so then you've got little Kuwait is maybe their marginal cost curve looks like this, and Saudi Arabia is a little bit bigger. So each country would have some sort of cost associated with pulling oil out of their ground that wouldn't be necessarily identical. Sounds like in Saudi Arabia and some of the Middle East areas, you know, you can pretty much stick a straw in the ground and the oil's like right there, right? And you just pull it out. So it's really cheap for them to pull oil out of the ground compared to other places where you might have to go down a mile to hit oil, right? And that would be more expensive. So there's different costs of bringing oil out of the ground. So over here, what we're going to do is look at the sum of their marginal cost. So with each one, if this is, let's say, the marginal cost of 10 units here, so 10 units at a price, or a cost rather of, I guess let's do $30 for Kuwait. And at $30, these guys could do 40. which means that the world's supply of oil would be 50 if they're acting together. So what we're doing over here is adding up the quantities for each nation to create the world supply, the sum of the marginal cost. So this is like the world supply. The world supply of oil. We're just adding up 10 plus 40 equals 50. Everybody with me? So this is like the marginal cost curve acting like a monopoly. So this is kind of our monopoly graph, right? Except that we've got individual companies that are contributing to the supply. All right, well then we can kind of fill in the rest of this picture here. Let's just do, I'm going to draw it kind of nice and high here. So we got some world demand for oil and marginal revenue. So just kind of do something off to the right over here. Because now the group of companies colluding with each other is just going to act like a good old monopolist. They have a little meeting together and they say, okay, everybody get together. We're going to decide what the world supply of oil should be. And so we maximize profits by producing the quantity where the revenue generated by the last barrel is equal to the cost of the last barrel. And then we're going to charge a price, the highest price people are willing and able to pay, which is $65 a barrel. And we're going to make lots of money, right? Acting like a monopolist, restricting the supply. All right, so then how do we decide how much Kuwait does and how much Saudi Arabia does? Well, we just work ourselves backwards, and that means that Saudi Arabia is going to do 45, and little Kuwait's going to do 15. 45 plus 15 equals 60, right? So we're going to divvy up the quantity. Everybody gets allocated a certain production level. Kuwait, you do 15. Saudi, you do 45. And then all of them get to enjoy a high world price of oil, 65. So now, the money, the world price of oil, the price of oil here is at 65. And so they would have average total cost curves that would make money, right, at that amount, which I'm not even going to draw in because I don't want to clutter up the graph. But we'd have an average total cost curve and they'd be making profits. All right, so now this is where we see some individual incentives kick in. Let me draw this a little bit higher. What would be a profitable thing for Kuwait to do in terms of their agreement? What would Kuwait want to do if they're currently at 15? So they're currently at 15, and they can sell, they're selling their oil at 65, and they're currently at 40. What does Kuwait have incentive to do if they could? Produce more. So they would have to cheat on the agreement. But check it out, if they cheat, then we're back to what we did when we introduced the Holy Grail, right? The 16th barrel, I'm just gonna sneak one. Nobody's even gonna, oil is homogeneous, right? Like, I'm just gonna sneak one more barrel of oil. Nobody needs to know over here. So I sneak off one more barrel. The cost of that barrel is less than the price. That's going to make me some money. Now, Kuwait has incentive to cheat. What about Saudi Arabia? Same thing. In fact, all of the countries have incentive to cheat on the agreement. And so guess what they do over time? They cheat on the agreement. And so we see these collusive arrangements eventually fall apart. The drug dealers do the same thing. Let's keep cocaine prices high. Well, what if I kick off one more ounce of cocaine? Well, that would be a profitable thing to do. We won't let my other cartel members know, right? So we see that the drug wars or other things happen because these collusive agreements, again, on paper sound fine, But using some economic reasoning, we look at the incentives of each one, and there's incentives for them to fall apart. All right, so let's write some of that down, and then we'll see if you guys got any other questions. All right, I'm going to write down the steps here. That we just did. So steps for collusion. Number one, world supply is the sum of the individual marginal cost curves for each of the n firms. I just did 2 for us, but maybe there's 10 companies, maybe there's 13. So that's my little sum of the marginal cost curve, which is the world supply. Number 2, set quantity like a monopolist in the world market. Set the quantity like a monopolist in the world market. Number 3, allocate the quantity to each member according to marginal cost. That was going backwards. So for instance, for Kuwait, it was 15 in my numbers, and the quantity for Saudi Arabia was 45. Number 4, world price of oil is set according to demand. And here we had the price of oil equal to $65 using my numbers I put up there. And then our big conclusion, the key point here, each member has incentive to cheat. Each member has incentive to cheat on agreement because the price is greater than the marginal cost. And cheat they do. All right, we'll call it a day there. See ya Thursday. Oh, attendance. Yeah. There you go.